I was in my bathroom just the other night, and one of the things I noticed was there was this really bright light shining into the bathroom, and I could see it through the frosting of the window. And I thought to myself, wow, is that the moon? So I went downstairs and I went outside to look at the moon, and it was full and dazzling bright. Looked pretty amazing, to be honest. And while I was out looking in the night sky, I started to then look at the stars in the night sky as well. And as you do, I started to pick out some of the constellations from all the stars out there. I could see the plough, in the way that our minds do. They kind of look at this scattering of stars and they'll seek out a pattern and then say, oh yeah, that looks like a plough. There it is, that's the plough. And the funny thing about looking up at the stars and seeing all the various stars up there, and then your brain doing what your brain does, which is to find the pattern amongst the noise, found the plough. What I noticed then is that actually, if I started to include some of the stars around it, some of the other stars in the sky, if I didn't just focus on those particular stars amongst the countless stars up there, it stopped looking like a plough, really. And in many ways, when we have our beliefs and our stories about ourselves and about others and about the world, it's a lot like looking up into the night sky, finding this wonderful plethora of stars out there, and then just picking on a few that seem to have some sort of pattern that's recognisable to us, and latching onto those to the exclusion of all the other stars. And if you think of the events in our life or the little moments in our life as the stars, then our story, if you like, are those few stars that form a recognisable constellation, a recognisable story, a pattern that we can kind of use in order to make sense of it all, really. But what I'd like you to think of in today's podcast is, I'd like you to think about those other stars that don't look like the plough, those other stars that don't fit the pattern. And so by including them in our vision, the plough might not look like the plough so much anymore. In short, I'd like you to think of the opposites to the stories that we tell ourselves. And those opposites are really important, not because they deny our reality by denying our story, but they extend our reality to include the things that our pattern matching brains might be excluding. And so, if we have a story about ourselves, I'm this or I'm that, or I'm this kind of person or I'm that kind of person, I'm shy or I'm nervous or I'm not very good at this, whatever the story happens to be, in order to include those other stars in the night sky, it's a good habit to get into to ask yourself about the opposites. Well, when was I good at that thing? Tell me about a time where I didn't appear to be so shy. Tell me about a time where I did feel confident. Tell me about a time where I did actually do that thing that I'm telling myself that I can't do. And what we find when we look for those opposites is they're there. Those opposites are there too. And so it's not just the pattern that I've focused on, but there's these things in existence which are the complete opposite to that pattern. And the same too in terms of our beliefs that kind of drive us about how other people see us, how the world is, how other people view us, how they treat us. All those kind of beliefs too. It's a good idea to look at the opposites. So I don't know, if we have a view that nobody likes us, nobody ever helps us out, I'm on my own here and I'm not going to get help from anybody, then one opposite to think of is, well, when did I get help from somebody? And like I say, it's not to deny your experience, it's not to deny your reality. It's actually to expand it and to include those overlooked moments of your reality and your experience back into the picture. It's just to widen one's focus from the plough and bring in all the other stars in the night sky. Because all of those other stars exist just as much as the few stars in the plough do. And in the same way, in our own story, in our own experience, in our own reality, all these other moments exist too. It's just that pattern matching brain of ours that is seeking to make sense of all of that noise has landed upon a pattern. And yet when we look at all the other stars out there, all the other moments in our story, we'll notice that actually our reality is wider than that pattern match that the brain has come up with. And so my encouragement is, whenever you notice yourself telling yourself a story about yourself or about how others interact with you or your place in the world, or whatever it happens to be, check out the opposite. Tell yourself about a time when the opposite was also true. Tell yourself about a time when you did do that thing, when you did feel that feeling, when you did have that sensation, when other people did do that thing that you think that they would never possibly do for you. And the more that you get into the habit of doing that, the bigger your night sky becomes. It ceases just to be this tiny plough, but it becomes this vast array of possibilities. Because if the pattern that you've landed on has some evidence, and yet when you look at the wider scatter, you find some evidence for the opposite, what that does then is it widens your vision, it widens your sense of possibility. Because if you think that you're not very good at something, or you're not very this, or you're not very that, or you don't have this personality characteristic that you think you might like that might be helpful to you, when you ask yourself the question, well, tell me about a time when I did, or tell me about a time when people have treated me that way, in the way that you would like. When you ask yourself that question, you realise that there's another story out there. And if both have got evidence, it gives you a lot more flexibility to kind of loosen the story that is currently there in vision. So that other stories, just as true, just as real, just as matching with your actual experience, can be chosen instead, if indeed they feel as though they're going to be more useful to you. So I really like the idea of opposites, of taking what feels true and then looking for the opposite of it, and noticing that actually it does exist, that opposite. And so maybe that's just as true, or even more true, or at least a possibility, because it is there. And so if you like that idea too, then feel free to spread it to someone else who you think would find it useful. Subscribe here for free wherever you get your podcasts. You can watch them on sliceoftherapy.com, and you could work with me directly. I'm Alun Parry, and you'll find me at liverpoolpsychotherapy.co.uk. So thanks for listening, and I'll be back again tomorrow with another one.